Blending mods. Hello dear friends, the topic we have today is very interesting. We will talk about blending mods. To be honest, when I was preparing the material for this lesson, I couldn't stop, because there are an infinity number of examples of the application of this wonderful operation. In addition to the blending mods, we will also discuss some other operations. We will analyze these operations in detail in the future, but today we will talk about them a little. Firstly, it will help you to be more interested in today's topic, and you'll see more expressive examples. And secondly, when we get to the study of these operations, you'll already have a little idea about them, and it will be easier for you to get acquainted with them and master them. Layer blending mods are also already applied to the image of cup of coffee, which I use today as a wallpaper. For example, it is absolutely clear that the steam that rises from a cup of coffee, it was placed here precisely by using this operation. But let's start from the beginning. The blending mod implies the interaction of pixels located on different layers, and it is obvious that there must be at least two of these layers, because they need to interact between each other. So let's take this cup of coffee and duplicate the main layer. You already know how to do it. So I duplicated the layer, and you see that these blending are on the panel of layers. By default, we have the normal. We click here and see a long list of 27 blending mods, which are divided into groups according to some common features, which we will talk about today. If you just move the mouse cursor in Photoshop, then you will immediately change the blending mod. Look at how my image changes when I just move the cursor. It immediately becomes completely different. In earlier versions, you can simply roll the mouse wheel. And, as you have already seen, there are a lot of different changes. You can even do it more quickly, and you will see how everything changes. It is necessary, of course, to understand the principle of these mods to apply them successfully. In previous example, we simply duplicated the layer, and we mixed two, in general, completely identical images with each other. In fact, we don't always have to duplicate the layer. There are also other options. For example, we want to work with some part of the layer, so we need to select this part of the layer. We take the quick selection tool, and now we'll select the girl's lips. So I select carefully. I remind you that if you go somewhere outside the area that would like to select, then you need to press Alt. A minus icon will appear, and you can carefully correct everything. Well, if something has gone radically wrong, then you can completely cancel the selection by pressing the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+D. And now attention, an interesting moment. Now we'll press Ctrl+J as we did before, but we don't duplicate the entire layer, but only the area we selected, that is, the lips. You see, on the new layer we have only lips. Of course, they could be selected more accurately. For example, you could use a mask and other tools, but we will not focus on this now. I'll just fix it a little bit by taking the eraser tool. Here are some small places. You can even edit the edge with a transparent eraser, so that it is not so sharp. So we turn it back on, and look, I go into layer blending mode and start moving the cursor. And you can see how the color changes depending on which of blending modes is active. This is how we can change the color of some details that we selected and placed them on a new layer, and then we choose the one we like. Of course, you can do this intuitively, but it's better when you understand how all of them work. And then you can use the blending mods successfully. That's what we had. And let's move on to the next file and analyze how it all works. First of all, duplicate the layer. I have already done this, and let's see. So, you have already noticed there are several groups here that distinguish blending mods by common characteristics: normal and dissolve. Well, normal is as it is. Dissolve also has little effect on the image and is used rarely, very rarely, I would say. And now we will look at the darken mods. If we scroll them like this, we will see that the image becomes darker. This happens because the pixels of the upper layer are multiplied by the pixels of the lower layer, and the intensity of dark shades becomes much higher. Meanwhile, the intensity of light shades remains unchanged. Thus, we get this effect. The most common mod in this section is the multiply. Let's apply it. And you see, the girl became immediately tanned. This is a very convenient operation if you need to edit a tan. Of course, you can adjust the degree of transparency and make this tan stronger or weaker. Lets it make more visible. But there is one thing. It turns out that we have darkened not only the skin, which we for example want to be darker, but also other part of the image. And in this case, as in many other cases with blending layers, a mask will help us. We take a mask, edit it, take a black brush and just go through the places of the image where we would like to use the blending mode. And you can see that in these places the image returns to its original state, like that. Or for example, if I wanted to make the skin a little lighter here, I could also do it this way. And of course, just as in previous case, we can work with some individual parts of the image, making them more saturated, darker. For example, I can create a new layer and using the eyedropper tool, take some kind of lip color sample. I take a brush, with the help of square brackets, I make the brush smaller, and I just paint over the lips. But it would be better to do it right away, with the multiply mode turned on. But I will do it like this, once I have already started. So look, I'm switching to multiply mode. And so, I got such a rich color, which of course I can make less saturated. Well, for example, like this. In the same way, you can edit other accents on the face. But I would also work with the eyes here on the layer mask, because, well, I don't want to darken them so much right here. I would probably return them to original state a little bit, with the help of a translucent brush. But we can edit glare here, in the most active places. You need to edit a mask on this layer. So with the help of a black brush, I can for example modify some parts on the lips a little bit, so it will look more natural. And now it seems as if the girl has just returned from the resort. Let's see what we had before. That was such a pale girl, and that what we did with her, with help of very simple manipulations. By the way, this is your first homework assignment, so remember, obviously, other blending modes from the same group will create similar effects, with just a few nuances. For example, darken and linear burn makes the shadows even deeper and even darker. But still the multiply mode is used most often. Let's move on to the next group, a group of modes, which are lightening. It is below the group that we discussed before. Everything became darker and the light remained the same in the previous example. That is, no contrast was added. Light tones didn't become lighter. In the blending mode group, everything is actually the opposite. The black color becomes completely transparent, not visible, and light shades become as intense as possible. Here we can see it by moving the mouse a little, or rolling the wheel among these modes. Let's see what opportunities the group gives us. If in previous case we got a darkening on the image or its individual parts, then this is the opposite. Plus, it gives additional features when working with objects on a black background. But more about that in a few minutes. So, about the lightning. We go to the top layer. I have already made a copy, and choose one of the modes. The screen mode is most often used, because the other modes, they are more intense and they are rarely used, and the multiply that we used before. So, select the screen. The image became lighter, and I, for example, edit a mask here. Take a brush and do the same as in previous case. I am going through all the places of the image which I don't want to blend with a black brush. Periodically I take the white brush if I did something wrong. That's it. Here I want to light up my face as much as possible now. Look at what we had. What a dark-skinned girl she was, and what she became. Now I'll use a black brush in the eye area to make the girl more dramatic. You see what happens to my mask? This layer becomes transparent, and now the eyes become so expressive. If this is too much, I go back to the white brush again, make it partly transparent, make this effect a little less intense. Then I take the black one. I can make brighter eyebrows, for example, or brighter lips. Like that. Perhaps this is also too much. I'm going back to the white brush. All the time I change the opacity depending on what I want to get. That is, it's all quite such a delicate moment. It would be nice to emphasize some trends. So it will be a black brush. Give a little volume, so that our image will be somehow expressive. Switching between white and black brush all the time. I think that you will master the mask tool perfectly. We'll talk about it so many times in different contexts that by the end of our course you'll be a professional. Here I added some shadows, and that's what I got. If you spend a little more time on this work, then of course the effect could be much more vivid. And if you also added knowledge of various other tools that we will study, it will be even better. I will add some shadows. And look, here is what we got. And that's what we had before. This is how we can, working with light and shadow, make the image lighter, and not just make it lighter, but do it so that our image meets our intention. And now about their useful properties in the screen mode, which allows us to place objects on a black background in images. Let's take this smoke. Let's copy it and put it in our image. Here I have added a new layer that completely overlaps the layer below. And now, when I change the blending mode to screen, all the black elements of this layer will become completely transparent. So I choose the screen, and here I can place the smoke in some other way. You can work with it for a very long time. Somehow change the size. You can also place any glowing, bright objects that are on a dark background, for example fire or some kind of flashes. That is, there are very many options for everything, and you can't list them all. Now you see another example of using this effect, but with multicolored smoke, and another glass like this. We talked about blending modes and studied darken and lightening modes. We will continue to talk about it. And first of all, I would like to demonstrate to you how you can combine these two modes. Let's see how you can use these two blending modes to make your face more sculptural. We need to make the light areas lighter now and the dark ones darker. We want to emphasize the contours of the face. We create a new clean layer. Using an eyedropper, we take a sample of the color of some light area. There, I take a soft brush and start drawing something like this in those areas where I want it to be lighter. Click blending modes and choose the screen. As you see, the lightning. Well, it's too much. If the lightning turns out to be strong, then of course we can always work with transparency and make sure that the lightning is the way we need. Sometimes you can even create several layers in order to make the layers brighter or, on the contrary, dimmer. Well, for example, like this. Now I'm creating another layer. In the previous case, the screen mode lightened the areas as much as possible, because in this mode the intensity of light shades increases. However, here it will be the opposite. Similarly, I take a color sample with an eyedropper and set the multiply mode so that I can see what I am doing. And with the help of a brush, I can add shadows in some areas. Of course, you can always make the brush more transparent, for example, or vice versa. We added shadows in some places, like that. And one more little trick. If you want to make such a dark vignette around the edge of your image, you need to create a new layer in the same way and take a suitable color sample. For example, from the here, we take a brush, we set the multiply mode and do it like this. By the way, Ctrl is pressed. The brush draws a straight line. You can do it somewhere and edit it like this, whatever you like. Something like that. We had a normal blending mode here. Then, you see, it turns out to be some kind of faded brown color, and the multiply mode creates transparency and gives this kind of saturation. You can even create several layers like this, and edit separate sections on each of them. Enough with this photo. I think that the principle is generally clear to you. And if we turn off eyes icons now, we will see what we had before and what we have now. Something like this. And now, if you see photos, for example, like this one, I specifically show you photos of different genres. You can guess how these beautiful light glares and such deep shadows were added. All this can be fixed with the help of the blending modes. Not only those that I showed you, but also others. The shadows or colors in this particular example are obviously made according to this principle. Let's talk now about the next group of blending modes, the contrast group. If we now go to the top layer in this file and start changing these modes, moving the mouse cursor, then we'll see how the image becomes more and more contrasting. This happens because dark pixels become as dark as possible, light ones become as light as possible, and at the same time, the average shades do not change their tone. We can verify this if we create a new layer and fill it with gray light with settings 128, 128, 128. This is the most average gray color. Press the keyboard shortcut Alt plus backspace. We have filled this layer with gray color. Let's turn this one off for now to see everything as it really is. And look, overlay mode. Except for hard mix, which works a little differently, all other modes do not give any changes at all. Here we have a photo, and here it is with blending modes. Let's do another experiment. I create a new layer, take the gradient tool, transition from black to white, like this, and I fill in this layer, moving the mouse cursor from bottom to top, from black to white. And look, if I now apply contrast modes, then you see that the part of the image that was filled with blacks come more saturated, darker, and the light part is lighter, which confirms what we talked about. Light pixels become even lighter when this mode is applied, and dark pixels become even darker. The middle part is where we have a gray color. If you look at the gray color here, when using all these modes, it remains almost the same as it was before. And of course, we can use this mode just to edit contrast. At the same time, we can decrease or increase its level, as we like. Well, we can also use it to create various creative effects. Moreover, it should be noted that the overlay mode, for example, gives greater contrast, and the soft light mode gives a more delicate, diffused light, although the contrast is also added. So just like that, these two blending modes, overlay and soft light, are mainly used. And now we will see what can be done with them and how they can be useful to us. Let's take this photo of a girl and use the overlay mode to try to get this kind of soft light effect. And first of all, we'll make a copy of the layer. We'll desaturate this layer. We need this in order for the dark and light colors to give us maximum saturation, creating exactly the effect that we need. And we go to the image, adjustments, and select desaturate, Shift plus Ctrl plus U. So we have a desaturated photo. Look, here are very deep shadows and very highlighted colors. Now to create this depth in shadows and in colors, we'll make this layer even more contrasting. To do this, we click the image, adjustments, and choose posterize. And we set the number of levels, 4. If we edit more, everything will change. We set 4. In the future, we'll talk more about this option. So far, it is enough. Then we need to blur to make it more softer. Find the filter, blur, select Gaussian blur. All settings are different on different photos. Here we have these settings. Click OK. And now we have such a blurry picture. We apply the overlay blending mode. And now we have almost the same image that we have here. But this corner, as you can see, is darkened. To do this, we create another new layer. We take an eyedropper and take a color sample. Then we take a brush and paint it all with the color we need. Like that. And it's better to apply multiply mode, so that it has the same depth. Here we can edit this too. And that's what we got. If we turn off eyes icons now, we'll see what we had and what we have now. In fact, this effect looks very good not only on portraits, but also on landscapes, on still lifes. It looks good on many images. And of course, we can always adjust the level of transparency, make this effect more or less highlighted, depending on what effect you want to achieve. And let's compare how the same image will look if you apply soft light here. Look, you see what a difference it makes. It is a similar effect, but it is much less highlighted. You can look, of course, at other options. That's the way it works. Well, let's leave the overlay and move on to the soft light. I have already duplicated the layer. Let's start by adding a little contrast to this photo with the help of soft light. Look, the overlay would give us a very harsh effect, but soft light gives another good option, especially if you slightly reduce the level of transparency. But I want to focus on the fact that soft light is ideal for applying different textures. Using it, you can also change the color of individual parts of the image. Let's create a new layer and fill it with a rainbow gradient. I choose gradient, and here we have a rainbow gradient among the presets. It is transparent. I'm taking it, and I'm paint this layer with a gradient. like that. Now, if I apply soft light here, I will get the effect of tinting, the level of which of course can be adjusted. And as always, don't forget about the mask. We can edit it, take a black brush and reduce the level of impact of green color on those parts of the image that we consider necessary. I will do it this way, but at the same time, the tinting is still there. This is an interesting effect. If we didn't fill the photo with a rainbow gradient, but just some one color, then we could, for example, change the hair color or some other details of the image this way. Just like overlay, soft light is really one of the most frequently used modes. Let's move on to the next blending group. You can assume that it implies various mathematical calculations. This group is used quite rarely, but still we will talk about it. When pixels of one and another layer are combined, a black color is obtained. It happens if pixels are absolutely identical. Let's apply difference mode. What does this give us? Look, the pixels of one layer completely coincide with the pixels of the other layer, and we get a perfect black color. But if we take the move tool and start moving the top layer, then you see what happens. We immediately see some colored areas in the place where our pixels are shifted, and this operation allows you to perfectly combine two images, if necessary, literally pixel by pixel. Because if I start moving and my pixels are completely compatible with each other, then I will just get the same black color. So this operation can be used for alignment. Well, let's look at other blending modes, which are still somewhat more commonly used. I will create a new layer now. Just in case, I think you have understood, but I will still say that the new layer is an absolutely clean layer with nothing on it. And a duplicate layer is a copy of a layer that repeats already existing layer. So I created a new layer, and let's try to use these mods on the last group. Perhaps it would be the best if I show you an example. Let's say we take hue, and I will choose some color now. Well, let's have one like this, for example. I will take a brush. The layer is already in the hue mode, and I paint it, and you see what is going on. The color that I had is replaced by another one. Since I have an opacity of 38%, then I get not the blue that I choose. But if I take a larger level, then I can edit some brighter areas in some places. That is, there is a lot of things you can draw here. This is how we can change the color of some parts of the image using this mod. Let's create another layer and apply saturation to it. Let's try it. And look, I have the same blue color. I will set 100%, regardless of the color of my brush. The level of saturation simply changes on areas where I use my brush. And if we change the saturation to color, then yes, I will have the same color again. And if you choose luminosity, then you just see this effect. It's hard for me to describe it, but sometimes it's also necessary. Let's leave the saturation already, something like that, so you can work out some details of the image. So now I'm making my lips more saturated, but just like that, selectively. That's what I got as a result of these manipulations. Of course, you can reduce the level of exposure by adjusting the opacity of the layer. And now let's move on to the homework. Let's remember everything we did today. So the first task is to create a contouring of a girl's face using the lightening and darken blending modes. The second task is to create such an image with soft focus using the overlay mode. The third task is to apply a rainbow texture to the portrait of a girl, and of course a little extra work on the layer mask. And the fourth task is to change the color of the hair of this girl with colored hair. This is a small addition to the lesson. We will talk about the difference between the hue and saturation modes. I created a new layer, and let's see what happens when we choose the saturation mode. Let's set it. In this case, we use the saturation mode. It turns out that the upper layer set the saturation settings for those colors that are at the bottom. Initially, brightness and color of the colors that are on the layer below do not change, but their saturation is changing. This is probably not very easy to understand, because the color may disappear altogether, even in this mode, but it just means that its saturation has changed. Look, for example, I'm going to take this blue color and try to draw on this upper layer. And in saturation mode, nothing really happens to here, because the saturation of this blue color is very close to saturation of the pink color. But if I start to draw on the background, then here we will see some changes, because there is a difference. The same thing will happen if I use a brush on the skin. In this case, the saturation will become higher, because the saturation of color that I use now is higher. If the saturation is lower than this color, then the opposite will happen. Now, instead of blue, let's take this light color. And look, I'm using a brush on this girl's hair and face, and the saturation here is even lower, and the image becomes actually black and white. Let's add black and white colors. If I use black and white colors which have zero saturation, then our image becomes black and white. That's the same thing happens if I use white color. See what happens. Let's take a color that is more saturated than the color that is on the base below. For example, I will take this bright one. By the way, saturation can be opened by pressing S key. Look, right now I have a bright red color. I will put it here, and I already have a saturation of 11. If I draw over here, the color doesn't change. It becomes more saturated. So, if I will use a color with low level of saturation, a color close to gray, on sections where we have a rather saturated color, then nothing will happen for me. Let's take some color. Let's try. So, you see, it also turns out to be a close shade to black and white, something like this. Here at the bottom we have a less saturated color, and on the upper layer we work with a more saturated color. If we use a color more saturated than the original one that we have on the lower layer, then the color becomes more intense. It seems to us that it's more intense, but in fact we just increase its saturation. And if we use a less intense color, then on the contrary, no changes will occur. We will talk more about it a little later, and we will learn the adjustment layers, and I think that then it will become a little more clear to you. So let's, for example, now duplicate the half of the image. That's how we will do it. I press the keyboard shortcut Ctrl plus G. I will apply saturation mode to it. You see, nothing has changed, because these colors have been repeated, and the saturation of the colors that are on the layer above hasn't changed at all. And now let's change the mode for this layer, where I have a half. We'll choose hue. And nothing has changed for me either, but it hasn't changed here for a completely different reason. Let's use one more layer. Let's add hue and see what will happen. In this case, the opposite happens. The color saturation, which we have set by the original image, remains, but at the same time, its color changes. Let's take, for example, the blue color and try to paint. You see, the color changes, but the saturation of the image remains unchanged. Only the color changes. And if I draw order a cake, then I will not make the cream bright blue, because its saturation is what it is. Saturation close to white. That is, white and black colors minimally change their color. White and black will not change at all, and the closer we are to these colors, the less effect of the hue mode we will see. For example, if we draw a black brush on the layer below, then it is black. The black color remains black. And if we draw with a white color, then the white color remains white. Let's use 50% gray color. Let's set it 128, 128 and 128. If we use it, then it will also remain the same. Let's summarize. I'm going to take a red brush now and draw a line with it on a clean layer with the normal blending mode. I put the first dot. Holding shift, I put the second. I got a smooth line this way. Now, if I change the blending mode to saturation, then look, I have changed the saturation of the color. My background didn't turn red, it just occurred the saturation of that red color that I used on the layer 1. But if I switch the same layer to the hue mode, then in this case, it is the color that will change. I got a shade of red. But although it was a bright red color, the saturation is used from the layer below. The saturation is determined by the lower layer in this situation, and the red color used on the layer with the hue mode adds a red tint, but the saturation remains of the layer that we have below. The hue and saturation are such shifters. In saturation mode, it is the saturation that is determined by the new layer. In the hue mode, it is the color, like that. I hope that you now understand the difference between these two modes. and see you next time.